to Book 101 review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is the Creativity Explorer, and of course, the author of several books, no other than Mr. Fredrik Haren.
Hello.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Frederick. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yes, from your perspective, I will introduce myself as as an author. I'm publishing my 11th book now. I've written books, both fiction and nonfiction, both published and self-published. But most of my books are about creativity. So, as you rightly pointed out, I'm the creativity explorer. So, I've spent the last 25 years exploring creativity and then writing about what I've learned.
Mr. Frederick Haren, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And let's talk about the world of creativity. What culture can teach us about thinking differently? Can you tell us about this insight?
Yes, so this is a book that is going to be published later this year, about end of November, beginning of December. But it's a book I've been researching for 25 years, you could say. And you could say it's kind of like uh, I do an analogy with food. Like if you're really, really interested in food, you will want to understand how food is being prepared all around the world. And I'm really, really interested in creativity. So as I was traveling around the world, I've been to 75 countries and interviewed thousands of creative people. I wanted to understand if there were how different people in different cultures in different countries would look at creativity in different ways. So the book consists of around 40 chapters, and every chapter is around one country. Like, what did I learn about creativity from Mongolia, from the Philippines, from Switzerland, and so on. It doesn't mean that every chapter is about what the people in this country think, how the people in this country think, but it's something I learned about creativity while going there and interviewing creative people. So it's you could look at it as the Anthony Bourdain of creativity if you want. Go around the world to learn. He goes around the world to learn about food. I go around the world and learn about creativity.
Indeed, Mr. Frederick. How does the very definition of creativity or good ideas differ from across cultures?
So, well, the good thing with this book is that there is not one way of defining creativity. That's what it not only to define creativity, but also how to become creative. People approach it in different ways. So, for example, one example I like is in the West, like the famous quote from Mark Zuckerberg is like, we need to move fast, and to move fast, you need to break things, something like that, to that effect. Basically, innovation of being fast, but pivoting and changing quickly and innovating. But I interviewed an artist in Afghanistan, and she practiced what she called um, patient creativity, because before she can paint, she actually makes her own paper, makes her own paint, makes her own brush, and that takes weeks and weeks and weeks. So before she can actually do the first brush stroke, she's been thinking about what to paint for days on end, and that totally changes the creative output of the actual painting versus going to the store, buying paper and pencil, and then just painting the next day. So it's not that creativity has to be slow. The idea is here that it can be slow. You can prolong consciously prolong your creative process, and that will change the way you create. You can also, of course, do the American way of really changing fast, and they're not right or wrong. They're just different approaches. So in this book, I do a lot of these different approaches to creativity, so that we have basically, so that we have more tools. Sometimes when you cook, you need to do it fast. Sometimes when you cook, you need to have to take your time. It's the same concept.
Very well said, Mr. Frederick. Beautifully articulated. Many Western narratives focus on the lone creative genius. How do other cultures emphasize collective creativity, community rituals, or intergenerational knowledge transfer in the creative process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually have a chapter about that, and surprisingly, it's about North Korea. So I went to North Korea because I wanted to understand what how do people in the least creative country on the planet look at creativity. And as a disclaimer, I have to add, of course, the North Korean government is a dictatorship and authority, and there's a lot of suffering in North Korea. But I didn't go there to study the politics or the government. I went there to study creativity. And in North Korea, they have a saying: one plus one doesn't equal two. One plus one equals big one. And by that they mean, if you have a piece of clay and you have another piece of clay, you combine the two, you don't have two clay, you have one big piece of clay. And they also apply this to creativity. So they don't look at creativity as something that I am like, they don't look at it as an individual skill. They look at it like we look at communication, as something that happens between people. You can't communicate without having someone to communicate with. And by looking at creativity as a collective process and not an individual process, the whole approach to creativity changes. The best example we have of this in the West is like the movie industry. At the end of the movie, every person involved in the movie, from the director to the authors to the photographer, but also the second camera grip, or the caterer or the driver, all of them are listed at the end, because people who make movies, they emphasize that without everyone helping, there wouldn't be a movie. It's the opposite of the creative genius. It's the creative collective. And we should, if you start looking at creativity this way, we start thinking more about how we create together. What is our collective creative process, not my individual creative process, things like that. And again, it doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It just means now we have two ways of looking at creativity. One, the individual creative process, and one is the collective creative process. They are both existing parallel to each other.
Can you share examples where specific cultural constraints like environmental, social, or religious material limitations have led to uniquely creative solutions or art forms?
Mm, well, I have a chapter about the Philippines, and my wife is from the Philippines, so I know the Philippines well. And when you go and visit, you don't even have to go to the Philippines. You can just meet a Filipino, and you would notice that they are generally very happy people. Uh, and I and everyone knows this, but where does it come from? Like, it's not the breast milk, but where does it come from? And I interviewed a couple of people, creative people in the Philippines, and they told me about resilience. And I'm a big fan of as an author. I'm a big fan of etymology. I like to the meanings of words, and everyone knows what the word resilience means. But the etymology of the word, it actually means not just to come back; it means to bounce back. It's like a spring bouncing back. And one of the was, I think it was not a minister, but someone working high up in the Philippine government. He told a story about his grandmother who grew up during the occupation of the Japanese, and he said, "My mother never told me any negative stories about the Japanese occupation. She only told me stories about how we survived, or stories about resilience." And that so if you only hear stories about bouncing back, you get a positive mindset. But if you only hear stories about, oh, they did these terrible things, or we hate these people, then you get stories of contempt and hate, and that does not breed creativity. Because creative people have this ability of bouncing. People say that for to be creative, you need to fail. No, actually, to be creative, you have to be good at bouncing back from failure. That's the difference. Everyone fails, but creative people have this ability to bounce back, which is the reference then to resilience. So if we want to become more creative, We should practice the ability to telling ourselves the good stories about the creative project that failed, not the bad stories. Not focus on why we failed. I mean, we can do evaluations, but we should tell the stories from a positive point of view, because there's always some positive lesson to learn, and that's what I've learned from the Philippines.
Mr. Frederick, beautifully articulated. Very well said. How do different culture approaches to problem solving, like holistic versus analytical, or indirect versus direct communication, foster distinct types of creativity?
I there's different. The story that comes to mind is the story of Switzerland. I went to I went and interviewed a Swiss watchmaker. He worked for all the big brands, but then he started his own company, and now he does bespoke, custom-made Swiss watches. And in Switzerland, they have this approach to perfection. That's why we like Swiss watches. But his definition of creativity was something better than perfect. And what I like with this is that he had this idea that we aim for perfection, and then when we have found this perfect way of doing something, we do it that way. But creativity is to find an even better way of doing it, something better than perfect. And this approach of trying to find an even better way of doing it is, if you ask me, a very effective way of looking at problem solving, because it's not focusing on the problem, it's focusing on an even better way of doing it. Another interview I did was a person in Greece, and she was an advertising executive. She talked about creativity as a path, because a lot of people focus on, like you would say, creativity is problem solving. But when we do focus on the problem, we're actually focusing on something that is in the way of what we want. If we focus on creativity as a path, we don't care that there's something in the way. It's like water. Water hits a rock. It doesn't stop there. It finds a way around the rock and it continues. If we look at creativity as a path, we don't get stopped by the problem. We go find a way to go around the problem, which is, I think, a very philosophical but or poetic way of looking at creativity, but also a very effective way of not letting problem solving define creativity, but instead looking at what we want to achieve, which is a much more positive mindset.
Mr. Frederick, we often link creativity with breaking rules, but how do we structured rituals, repetitive practices, or deep mastery of tradition in some cultures become foundation for profound innovation within those forms?
Yeah, okay. I'll tell you two. I'll tell you one story, and if you want, I can tell you another one. So I went to and interviewed a chef in Mexico. He has been ranked as, I think, the seventh best restaurant in the world. I think on top 50 anyway. I think seventh. So he's a really really creative, innovative chef. But he's a Mexican chef, and he does Mexican traditional food. So I asked him a question like, how do you innovate if you are committed to the tradition of the food that you are cooking, in your case Mexican food? And he said this, that the balance is between the tradition and the innovation. And he called it, the sweet spot we should aim for is surprisingly familiar, or familiarly surprising. Actually, no, that's what he said. So, familiarly surprising, meaning, he used as an example that there's a cactus that they use in Mexico to cook it and eat it. But he took that cactus, and that's a very familiar taste for the Mexicans. But instead of cooking it and making a soup out of it, he make an ice cream of it. So when you eat it as a Mexican, you say, "Oh, I recognize this taste, but wow, that was surprising to do it as an ice cream." And then you have the surprising element and the familiarity, the effect of it. If you only do something that is surprising and not familiar, people get scared away. If you make something that's 100% familiar, people are not going to be intrigued, because it's something they know already. The sweet spot is to be familiar and surprising at the same time. And that's a good way if you want to introduce something new to your market, to think about what in this idea is the familiar aspect and what is the surprising aspect, and have I reached the sweet spot, or is it too familiar, or is it too surprising?
Mr. Frederick, are there cultures where creativity is more inherently tied to physical making, craftsmanship, or embodied knowledge rather than abstract conceptualization?
I would say it's not really tied to culture, it's more tied to professions. So for example, and a painter is about getting the idea out on something physical, but or the creativity of an painter is very different from the creativity of an engineer, which is very different from the creativity of a politician, for example. And the more on these 75 different countries I've gone to, I was recently in Bhutan, and I also met with like Buddhist and traditional painters, and the traditional designers, and traditional Bhutanese people. But I also met with a web designer, a web agency, and I walked into the studio, and it looked exactly like any other design studio anywhere in the world. I've been to the web design studios in Mongolia too, but I've been in Sweden, in Germany, New York, everywhere, and they all look exactly the same. A web designer is a web designer nowhere, no matter where you go, and their office looks very, very similar. It was such a culture transition to walk from that office and then just down the stairs, and boom, now you're in Srangila, the Srangila Bhutan, traditional Bhutan, and then in there's two different worlds just behind that yellow door.
Mr. Frederick, as the creativity explorer and an author, what are your short term and long term goals?
My long-term goal is to understand human creativity. So I study humanity to understand creativity, and I study creativity to understand humanity. So they go both ways. And it's an the more so explore, the definition of explore is to venture into unknown territory in order to learn more about it, which means you are never done. So this is a topic that I can explore until I die. My goal is to die on stage.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Frederick, and looking forward for more success. What would be your piece of advice for those people out there want to explore creativity as well as an author?
To explore creativity,
Yes, please.
my goal would actually be to explore creativity, to understand that whatever creative process, whatever understanding you have of creativity, creativity can be so much more. So learn from different kinds of creative people, study different creative techniques, travel, anything that you can do to expand your understanding of the world and the understanding of creativity. Because a lot of people, they become experts on something and then they stick to that. And there's nothing wrong with being an expert, but an expert has all the answers. You want to be an explorer because an explorer has all the questions. So ask the questions of yourself. What do I not know that I would benefit from knowing? Then go and explore that. Every time we go and explore unknown areas of ourselves, it doesn't have to be that you need to travel. You can also explore unknown parts of yourself. But every time we explore the unknown, we grow as people, and we grow as creative. Creativity is very much connected to curiosity, surprise, things like that. So go and venture into those areas.
Thank you for your advice, Mr. Frederick. And what specific techniques or perspective from other cultures can help individuals challenge their own deeply ingrained cognitive biases and assumption to think more openly?
So one of the chapters in the book is about Mongolia, and I interviewed some Mongolian nomads. So they're living a nomadic lifestyle, and people think that nomads means that you don't have a home or that you always travel, but it's not true. They have a home, they have a tent, and they live in that tent for extensive periods of time, like for months on end. They don't always travel. They not at least not all nomads, most they travel until they find the perfect place, and then they live there. But every time when they wake up, they look out through the tent door and they say to themselves, this was a perfect place to live yesterday, but is it a perfect place to live today? And if it's not, they tear down their whole village and they move on. And this, I called it to think like a Mongolian. This mindset is so valuable for all of us. If you've been doing something for a long time, and maybe that has been the right thing for you to do, but every day when we wake up, you say, this is what I have been doing, but is this still what I should be doing? So I wake up every morning and I say, I am the creativity explorer, but should I still continue to be the creativity explorer, or should I explore something else? And if the answer is yes, you should still be the creativity explorer, I do it for one more day. There's nothing more depressing than people who stay in relationships for too long, stay in jobs for too long, create the same kind of things for too long. Uh, it is the opposite of creativity. It's the saddest life. We should never be afraid to let go of what we've done if the answer to what we now want to do is better than what we have been doing. If what we have been doing is great, then for God's sake, let's continue.
Yes, people, continue if you prosper in that area. In a world obsessed with speed and disruption, what can we learn about cultures or practices that value slow craftsmanship, deep contemplation, or creativity developed over very long time horizons?
Yeah, so one of the interviews that comes to mind now is the one from Bhutan, where I interviewed the former minister of tourism, as he happens to be. But we had a discussion about Buddhism and creativity, and he said in the West, you tend to look at creativity as something that is like a creative, like you are creating an expression of who you are. It's like you're expressing yourself. That's what self-expression is. What creativity is. And he said, you got it all wrong. It's no, he said, it's not wrong, but the more profound reason to be creative is to understand yourself. Creativity is an inward journey. And I think this is really true. So every like truly creative people, every time they have created something, they had learned something about who they are. And I would go so far to say, if you create something and you haven't learned something about yourself, you haven't been creative. So anytime you create a project, you can evaluate uh, what you created, you can evaluate the reaction of other people, but more importantly, you should evaluate, who did I become by doing this? Creativity is like a human superpower. It makes us happier and more fulfilled, but most importantly, it helps us understand who we are. That is that the reason why the word creativity is closely related to the word create, which is connected to the word creator, which means God. So we can look at creativity as like a channel for understanding who we truly are as human beings.
Very well said again, Mr. Frank. Very well said, Mr. Frederick, I should say. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people. My other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season as well, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in its fourth season too. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101. Love Letters in third season, and Movie 101 Review and Music 101 in its fourth season, and Science 101 and Sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Mr. Frederick, if you could encourage every individual or organization to adopt one creative practice or mindset from another culture, what would it be and why?
I really like the one from Thailand. I interviewed a Thai origami teacher, origami artist, and she said that she never struggled from creative anxiety, and she connected that to the Thai practice of sabai sabai. Sabai sabai means like don't worry, be happy, and it's a very big part of the Thai society. So whenever she gets stuck in a creative project, she just stands up, walks outside, goes to Starbucks, has a cup of coffee, and then waits for the creative block to stop. But she has zero anxiety. She and I could see it in her eyes. She's like, yeah, and it's basically it's like you can. It's like the opposite of road. Like most people have creative anxiety. Like most people have road rage when they get stuck in a traffic light and they get so stressed out. Why is it not green? Why is it not green? And some people have this ability to say, okay, well, the light is red. I'm going to wait until it's green, and with no anxiety whatsoever. People tend to believe that creativity is a process of anxiety and stress. It's not, it's the opposite. Creativity makes us less anxious and less stressed and more happy. And if we get stressed and anxious about our creative process, we are approaching it wrong. It's kind of like people who are really good with animals. They will walk up to an animal with no stress and the animal will not get stressed. But if you're afraid of a snake, the snake will feel it. It's the same with creativity. If you are anxious, the creative process will become anxious. So to learn from this Thai origami artist and other creative people is to approach creativity without anxiety or with as little anxiety as possible. And this can be practiced. And when we do that, the creative process becomes less anxious and more joyful and more successful. Because great ideas does not come from anxiety. Well, there are exceptions, but 99.9% it comes from serenity, calmness, being one with the universe, the opposite of anxiety.
Mr. Fredrik Haren, thank you so much for sharing your books to the world. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your books as well as your advocacy to the world?
Yes, please. So thanks so much. It was a great conversation, and I hope when the book comes out, they will pick up the world of creativity.
Yes, people. And Mr. Frederick, where do people buy your books?
Wherever they buy books, it's published by Wiley, so it will be available in November or end of November all around the world. And until then, or whenever, they can join me at frederikharen.com or on LinkedIn, the Creativity Explorer, where I generally regularly post about creativity.
Yes, people, support Mr. Frederick Haren because if you support him, more and more and more empowering books to come, more and more creativity explored to come. So, Mr. Frederick, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
More to come, people. See you soon.